Dharmin, hi, good to have you with us.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Dharmin, this is usually all of my sessions that we do at Asia Tech, right, are interesting and exciting. This one is mouth-watering as well, right? For the fact that you are empowering and enabling a lot of us consumers to visualize our food, right, before we eat it in a restaurant, right? Or when we're actually out there, it's absolutely difficult, right? I at these pizzerias, right, I find it very difficult, to visualize what my pizza, for example, is going to look like, right? With all the ingredients, all the toppings, so on and so forth, right? And I think it just becomes a very important connect, right? In one person wanting to decide. So, this is one conversation that I've been actually looking forward to for that particular reason, right? Understanding, all of what you've been doing in enabling many of these businesses to perform better, to engage their customer better, right? To fill in that void which exists, right? Ratings do a good job, right, in telling you if the person is doing good or bad, right? But conversion still is a problem. It takes one a lot of time at that table in a restaurant to go out and kind of place an order, right? Uh, this possibly with what you're doing with peAR helps us do that better. Thus, this becomes, like I said, a mouth-watering conversation in that context.
Correct. Absolutely. Right.
Super.
We have seen that problem, and even today, every time I also visit restaurants, right,
Right.
it still gets frustrating when I see people reading a paper menu. And like,
Awesome.
why?
Super. I mean, so we're going to talk a lot about that, right? Your journey of building what you're doing, how are you empowering these customers, right? And possibly, in a way, creating an alternative system, which is not just rating and rankings dependent, but also empowering these restaurants to, like I said, right, communicate better. But before we do all of that, Armin, I'd love you to take us through, you know, your background. I think that'll be a great starting point. And how did, say, the early team come together, right? I think it'll be a phenomenal start. And from there, we take it forward to discussing more about peAR.
Sure. So what I'll do is, as founders, I personally come from a hardcore marketing background. Right.
Right.
I was a Facebook ads expert in 2016, when
Mhm.
even before Geo was there. Right.
Right.
I used to help UK and US based clients in managing their Facebook ads. And by
Uh-huh.
default, since I was in the space, I ended up being a food blogger.
Right.
Right. So, and food has always been a passion. You can clearly see. Right. I have been by default, since I was a food blogger, I used to visit a lot of restaurants,
Right.
right? And the other two co-founders, Parth and Dhruvesh, so they both have been computer science pass outs. They have
Right.
been working in augmented reality for the
Hmm.
last 4 to 5 years, uh, helping UAE-based companies. They have over 1 million
Right.
installs. Great stuff they have done in augmented reality, and even today, it is still a very nascent space. Like,
Right.
if you think about it, it's a very small space, right? So we visited one of those restaurants, right? And by the way, I started the company when I was in my second year of college, I think,
Interesting.
right? By third year, we were already funded. I remember I had my final year mark sheet and the term sheet together.
Interesting.
So what used to happen is, since I was a food blogger by default, I used to visit restaurants, and I once, I had to Parth and Dhruvesh also with me.
Right.
Right. So over there, we ended up ordering pancakes.
Uh-huh.
We thought that there will be three pancakes in it,
Right.
but when it arrived, there was only one pancake.
Right.
Right? And we were very disappointed. We're like, why is it that we would be paying for something we don't even know?
Right.
Right? It is absolutely crazy to think of. We started
Absolutely.
talking with more and more users. Right? We became waiters for initial restaurants. Try to understand what more users were saying on the restaurant, and also, since I had a lot of restaurant partner friends, right, we
Right.
started talking more and realized, boss, yeah, over 100 years, right, ordering has been the same. Right?
Right.
Menu cards have been on paper and pen.
Right.
Right? If you think of it, the whole ordering system still is not digital. Right?
Right.
They have, as restaurant, they have no idea. Are you a repeat user? Are you a new user? Like, let's say if you visited my restaurant last time, you
Right.
liked brownies, right? Can I ask you at the end of your meal to probably have the brownie again? Right?
Uh-huh.
There is really no way they are engaging with you. They are upselling you. Nothing that is happening in the dining space.
Right.
Right? And it has been stagnant for a lot of years at this point.
Right.
and with the tech that we had and our expertise in augmented reality,
Uh-huh.
right, we realized that this is the very correct fit because food is very visual, right?
Hmm.
It is being sold on visuals. We see something on someone else's table,
Right.
right? We see something online, we're like, "ये खाना है मेरे को,"
Right.
right? But when it comes to menus, they're still paper based, and they cannot have long, huge menus with all photos. That's not feasible on a physical space ever, right? It had to be digital. It had to be augmented reality. So we just started with peAR.
Interesting. Interesting. That's a phenomenal start, right? And Dharmin, while you're saying what you are, right, I'm in my mind just thinking of so many instances, right, where this is essentially what I have been through as a consumer, right? Watching and and trust you me, what happens is, when you enter a restaurant with a certain, say a dish or a cuisine in mind, right? But by the end of it, you keep looking at, what are others eating, and it just kind of changes the track that you had built, right? Because there is little representation, right, in terms of pictures on the menu, right? There are many occasions when you're eating a new, for example, a cuisine, right? You want to visually understand it. It's just so much more important, right? How will it look like, right? I think in your mind you've already painted a picture, but not having a visual is just so much more, makes it so much more inefficient, right? And trust you me, one thing that has happened, right, post COVID is that, and I'm sure this is possibly true for many other people, right? Is that we don't want to go wrong on making that order, right? Because the other order, for example, a replacement will take forever. I think this becomes just so much more important, right? But Dharmin, I think there's definitely a case, right? And you definitely have a consumer on the other side, who you're talking to. But while we do that, tell me a little more about the construct of peAR, right? So, what is that journey like? What's the relationship that you built with the restaurant? Um, what are the timelines of, for example, onboarding a restaurant, right? Because this does not necessarily seems like a DIY. This seems that you'll have to you'll have to handhold these restaurants into, coming on board, creating a profile, so on and so forth, right? Tell me a little more about that.
Sure. So essentially, as a restaurant, there are two
Mhm.
major things we clearly help you with, right?
Sure.
One is helping your average order value, increasing that, right?
Right.
And second is getting your customers back more often,
Okay.
right? Increasing your repeat rates. These are
Right.
the two major things where we help them.
Hmm.
As a restaurant, how your onboarding process completely looks like, right? And that is what we are striving for, right? We are constantly trying to make it a DIY type solution
Right.
where any restaurant in the world can do it because we see it as a world problem,
Right.
right? We currently have 500 restaurants in Mumbai and Delhi NCR, but we
Uh-huh.
clearly see it as a world problem and we want to solve it in that sense.
Right.
So you download an app as a restaurant,
Hmm.
right? You make your 3D models, you make capture a small video, right? From
Okay.
that video, our proprietary tech and everything that we do, amazing things that we do on the tech end, right,
Right.
is able to convert that video into a 3D model, right? You do
Uh-huh.
it for at least about 40% of your menu,
Right.
right? And then you fill in all the other details. We'll
Uh-huh.
provide you with QR codes, right? And we'll of course discuss the commercials and everything. And
Right.
once you are onboarded on the app, it roughly takes about a week for a restaurant to onboard,
Hmm.
right? That is when we'll provide you with QR codes, and then you can ask all the customers at your restaurant that are coming in to download the app and order from the app. So
Okay.
as customers also they get discounts, loyalty points, cashbacks for ordering from the app. They can visualize the menu, right?
Mhm.
And they can order and pay the bill also from the app. So it's a
Right.
complete end-to-end solution for both of them.
Very interesting. Now, Dharmin, when I hear what you say, right, and there are established players, right? I mean, you have one listed entity which I think has been absolutely phenomenal for the Indian startup ecosystem, right? And then there is another one which has raised a massive amount of funding, right? Now these are players who literally kind of I mean, the market is largely divided between these two players, right? And then there are a bunch of others who've now necessarily come in, right, who enabled, for example, I think COVID propelled their journey, right? So you have the dot pays of the world, and a bunch of others, right, which came in, which enabled these restaurants to very quickly get into a non-touch environment, so on and so forth, right? Now, if we really look at what's happened, right, in this entire scheme of things, is that the consumer journey, these companies have been very smart in understanding the consumer's journey, and they've adopted things very fast, right? With what you are doing, right, by implementing AR/VR, right? These organizations already have an understanding of the consumer behavior, right? They already have a track of repeats and so forth, right? So every single time I go on a Zomato, right, it just puts out all of the orders that I've done in the past. And if, for example, I want to repeat an order in a single click and so on and so forth, right? I mean, how do you kind of, I
Differentiate
understand,
from most of that.
I understand how you're kind of differentiating yourself by, say, putting out these, the AR/VR piece, right? But do you essentially are creating an independent ecosystem, or is this an ecosystem which could now be blended with existing platforms that these restaurants or businesses already operate on, right? What's the construct of your relationship with these, um, restaurants? Is what I
Other
want.
players also.
Yeah.
Essentially, we look at it majorly, right? As
Uh-huh.
you correctly said, in the online home ordering or home delivery space,
Right.
right? The customer experience has become much better,
Mhm.
right? And that is the problem, right? We are purely a dining app, right?
Okay.
We do not solve it for home delivery. We are not into that space, right?
Right.
Or food delivery. We are purely into a dining space,
Okay.
right? And there the problem exists,
Uh-huh.
right? When you are dining in also, no one asks, like, suggests you, for example, to have a dessert at the end, or no one suggests you at that point
Right.
that this was what you ordered the last time,
Mhm.
right? And it happens so frequently, right? You visit a restaurant, you had remembered that you had liked something the
Right.
last time, you visit there again, and some, you're like, "Yaar, kya khaya tha, last time kya khaya tha?" Like, I don't remember exactly
Right.
what that is. And that is always there. And that is the problem. We are purely focusing on the dine-in space, right?
Okay.
Which is actually 4 times larger than the food delivery space,
Right.
right? Market size wise. And that is how first off we clearly differentiate. Everyone, let them focus on food delivery,
Right.
right? We'll focus on dining. And second thing that we do is they as a restaurant, they don't have any data for dining.
Right.
Right? They have data on repeat users for home delivery. That,
Right.
let's say this is the 5th time someone is ordering from your restaurant
Right.
for home delivery.
Uh-huh.
But dine-in, if this is the 5th time you are visiting that restaurant for dine-in, they have no idea.
Right.
Right? Like, you might be coming in there for last 2 years and they might not have any idea
Sure.
that you were there. Right?
Interesting.
So, and that is exactly what we solve. Right?
Interesting.
We help them provide all that data for dining, right? And on top of that, we build loyalty systems for dining. Like, for example, let's say if you visit for dining in tomorrow, right, you wouldn't get any discounts, cashbacks, loyalty points, right? You don't have actually really any incentive to visit the restaurant that you had visited, let's say last month, for dining
Uh-huh.
in,
Okay.
right? You kind of have really no monetary incentive to do it.
But let me tell you this, right? Now, this is, there are many, many players, for example, I mean, dine out like platforms, right? Easy Diner, Dine Out, right? These are platforms which are essentially table reservation platforms. And they've actually gone beyond that, right? They've empowered a lot of these restaurants to do many things better, right? And these are essentially, and they have those features, right? Where you can actually go and you can look at the digital menus and so on and so forth, right? Uh, Now, while I understand what you're saying, right, that the dine-in market is 4x of the delivery market, a large part of that, right, a substantial percentage of that is basically very, very functional consumption, right, which is very quick consumption. It's what you're possibly referring to and what I am talking of, right? When I talk to you, are essentially restaurants where the AOVs, per person price of eating out would be say 1,000 rupees, 1,200 rupees onwards, right? And they would actually go on to spend this kind of money to ensure that the experience is phenomenal, right? Uh, the differentiator that you're trying to establish could actually, in that sense, be much smaller, given that that particular size, right? I mean, that aspirational consumption is still picking up, right? A butter chicken is a butter chicken. I mean, you really can't do that. And that's, in fact, even for the Zomatos of the world and the Swiggies of the world, that's the larger part of consumption. Uh, is that a correct understanding, or is that
We have
something
seen
that
actually
existed
contrary to it,
and
right?
it's changing?
It's
What's your
it's
sense of
already changing, and we have
it?
seen a lot contrary to it. What happens is butter chicken at all different restaurants is served differently,
Sure.
ingredients are different, and majorly ratings and reviews for them are also missing
Right.
at the end of the day, right? That is also not being given for dining in today.
Sure.
and the quantity also is very different across, right?
Right.
And majorly, as every restaurant is trying, presentation is completely different,
Hmm.
right? I have seen pizzas, a simple pizza, right,
Right.
being served in 50 different ways at
Right.
this point across
Right.
restaurants,
Right.
right? And that is what they're, and that's also kind of the fun of eating out, right? What
Interesting.
you cannot have that at home delivery, and that is kind of the whole point. A lot of us actually, because that's the whole experience that you get,
Right.
right? And restaurants try to create it, but when it's time to actually sell it before, I don't
Uh-huh.
know how your pizza would be if it is something different. If it is, let's say, 5-star rated at your restaurant,
Right.
I have no idea. Right? I
Right.
walked in, I kind of have really no clue.
Sure.
So that is what we have been trying to solve. If you look at dine out, and as you mentioned, right, dine out or easy diner, the problem with them is they are still majorly a table reservation platform only. They are not
Okay.
trying to empower restaurants,
Right.
right? And they are really not enhancing your dining journey,
Uh-huh.
right? If you think about it, there is what they have done is just got you or got a restaurant online, right?
Uh-huh.
But then show you a physical type menu only where it's completely read. You still read an order,
Right.
right? There is no really fun or enjoyable experience while ordering,
Hmm.
right? Again, no ratings, reviews for each dish. Let's say, for example, your friend recommended you, right? We
Right.
also have those parts baked in, right? You do not get those loyalty points
Right.
for kind of visiting the restaurant again. Really, the whole chain is broken over there, and that is what we are trying to solve, and that is why we have had great success with it.
Interesting. I mean, when you say what you say, right? A lot of these companies are now actually looking at POS, right? I mean, which is actually the second point in one of your answers, right? Now, a lot of these companies are essentially looking at POS integrations, right? So while of course they're doing a dot pay like play, where the menus are available digitally, and I think 2020 has been a very, it's been a year of innovation, right? Of course, it's been a bad year in many ways, but I think it's also been a year of innovation, right? I think for the innovators and for the adopters, right? We haven't seen the transformation like the way we did. Now, when you look at, so a lot of these companies have actually gone out to create POSs, right? They're actually putting point of sales across all of these restaurants, right? Be it the Zomatos of the world, be it Swiggy's, be it Dine Out, many others, right? And they're now kind of doing digital integration of menus, right? That's the second piece of it. The third piece of it, what you kind of highlighted, right? That there is little on loyalty points and stuff like that. Now, this has been a fragmented market, right? Now, when you have an integration, restaurants in any case have been registering a lot of numbers of the users who enter restaurants, right? They've been sending them offers, they've been sending them SMS campaigns and stuff like that, right? Unfortunately, it wasn't stitched together, right? Possibly a
Yeah.
way a technology company can do, right? But these are solutions that have been available in the market, right? And when you actually look at that entire play, you have to look at it from a complete value chain ownership standpoint, right? Where you acquire it at a menu level, you identify a customer as soon as he or she walks into a restaurant, uh, and that you do through the app that is there, uh, to displaying great food, to loyalty, where you're capturing this to point of sale, right? Now, a lot of these players are positioned to do that very in a they're in a very strong position to offer that, right? I mean, the kind of restaurants that are dealing with them are phenomenal. I mean, we're seeing a surge when it comes to, say, for example, the category that I spoke to you about, right, which is experiential dining, and something that you also kind of alluding to. Now, we're seeing a huge surge in this, right? And especially after COVID, once the lockdown was over, people literally hit that market with vengeance. They've realized the
The fun of eating out,
fun
essentially.
of eating out, absolutely. And how important is it to eat out, right? How do you position yourself? I mean, you're a fairly new player on the block, right? And I'm not taking it away from you. You're possibly re-engineering it in a very different way. You are putting out your business in a very different way. But what becomes the moat in a process like this, right? What becomes a moat in a market which is already, uh, in a way, engaging with some of these large established players? What becomes
Yes.
your
So there are two main reasons why we
and
started, right?
and and how difficult or easy is onboarding, right? Because vendor acquisition is something which is very, very important, right? And these are a
Correct.
lot of these people are people who burn their hands well. So I'd love you to throw some light on both of these aspects, right? I'd love to understand from you in terms of how are you solving for both these things.
So how we look at it, and as you correctly said, right, the main problem is it is still fragmented,
Mhm.
right? All of the solution, how many times, or for example, how many SMS do you have for loyalty points,
Sure.
right? You don't even get a reminder that was आपके loyalty points expire होने वाला है, or let's say you haven't used it. Like really, the whole piece of it is so fragmented to a point, right? Even when it comes to dining in, right? What used to happen is, and that is when we looked at it and realized that someone has to come in and
Right.
take the ownership from start to end,
Mm-hmm.
right? From the time you discover a restaurant online or offline, right, to the time you are ordering, your whole
Uh-huh.
ordering process has to be amazingly fun,
Right.
right? And from then on to you getting the food ratings reviews till the point you get, let's say, some financial incentive, to the point you kind of visit again,
Right.
right? The whole journey has to be stitched together, and
Uh-huh.
it has to be stitched together very perfectly,
Right.
right? And for the restaurant also, the whole journey has to be equally good,
Right.
right? And how we also pitch it across is, we are not, we're not here to do anything, we are just here to change how people are ordering inside the
Interesting.
restaurant,
Right.
right? We are not, we don't tell them keep watch, stop reading and ordering and watch and order,
Right.
right? That is how we were, like how Ola used to do it back in the day, right? Stop like going out for a cab, book a cab, it will come to you,
Right.
right? Similarly, we are changing that base consumer habit
Interesting.
altogether, and that is why we have seen a lot of success with it.
Right.
Every time we have seen a customer use it,
Uh-huh.
right, they go and tell four other friends about it. And like what happens is, let's say if you have used it 2 or 3 times, once you
Right.
are in the habit of watching and ordering, you have more confidence in that, okay, this is what I am buying.
100%.
Going back to an old school, or even for that matter, even if you normally scan a QR and order,
Right.
there you don't get any of these functionalities. It's still a type of, you basically got a restaurant online,
Right.
right, but did not use any of the advantages of really being online in the
Right.
first place. Like those are the advantages of being online. You kind of never
Interesting.
used it.
Right.
So that is how we solve it across, and that is why we have seen so much love on the consumer end as well.
Super. I mean, you already have a buyer in the sense that already you already have a download, right? In me, because like I said, right at the outset of a conversation, right? I mean, I believe in that visual appeal, right? And I'm sure so do a lot of other people. And I can just, I can fathom, how quickly the conversions could happen because you're constantly tentative, and especially when you're going out in larger groups, right? You're always trying to sort of manage it for other people. You're not sure, right? And so many other things. And I think this is possibly something which could really help one solve the gap, right? And I think that's possibly one such feature which completely stands out. And I'm sure a lot of these features don't that we don't necessarily experience firsthand, right? At the back of everything, make restaurants more intelligent, right? Dharmin, I think it's important, right? Well, of course, we've been discussing about what we have. I think it becomes important that we talk of numbers in the sense that you've achieved some significant ground, right? There are some
Correct.
great restaurants that you already work with. Tell us a little more about that, right? What are the number of
Sure.
restaurants? What are the number of orders that you're doing? And I understand there are certain numbers that you can talk of, certain numbers that you can't talk of, and I leave it to your judgment, right? In terms of how do you want to answer that. But I would love to know the numbers.
Sure. So essentially, we started with the app after the first lockdown,
Mhm.
right? And that was in October in Mumbai. That we are Mumbai based. In October was when some restaurants were at least finally allowed to open
Right.
after the first lockdown,
Right. Right.
right? That month, I remember we barely did about 500 orders, right,
Okay.
across restaurants.
Right.
Last month, that is last November, we did 11,000 orders on
Interesting.
that, right? That is almost 10x in a year. And in this also year, almost 4 to 5 months, it was completely closed, right?
Uh-huh.
Because of the second wave. From April to August, right? Again, the dining industry was completely shut down,
Right.
right? And just from August, in August, we did about 6,000 orders in that month,
Interesting.
right? To about 11,000, almost double of that within a quarter, right?
Interesting. Interesting. That has been a fun
Uh,
question. Please go ahead.
sure. On the restaurant end also, uh, we have now partnered with over 500 plus restaurants. Right, we
Amazing.
have brands like Pocket Cafe, Chocolate Room, 99 Pancakes,
Right.
right, and some high-end restaurants like Candy and Lean,
Right.
and that type of, and we have across the category. What we
Interesting.
have seen actually is very, and this is something very shocking to me also,
Right.
right? Not just the higher end restaurants, or let's say restaurants with 1,000 plus cost restaurants, but even
Right.
with restaurants, let's say, who are at 400, 500 range, right? Even they have been using our solution very well, and it is
Interesting.
because we have made it very cost efficient in the first place,
Hmm.
right? And what they have also realized is it helps them also equally as it was helping, let's say, the bigger players, right? And even they always wanted to do it, but it was the problem is there was no one helping them do it,
Right.
right? So
Interesting.
that is
I
interestingly
mean,
that we have seen.
super. Very interesting, right? A fun question. What's been one thing that kind of completely amazed you, right? With how it turned out. I mean, we typically enter, I think, any uh, uh, place or in business, right? With a certain, there's a certain understanding that you have, right? It's going to work, it's not going to work, right? And it what is that one thing which completely blew you away, saying that this is not what I anticipated, right?
Yeah.
This is a pleasant surprise, and that possibly led into, say, an addition to the to the to the to the cause that you have, right? Which possibly made it look just so much more exciting, right? What's been that one such moment which kind of completely flabbergasted you?
So I would probably say there are not just one, but there are two or three such moments where I have seen, or like even this is something that is possible,
Right.
right? One is I have seen a lot of QSRs using it. Right. I
Interesting.
used to think that this might be a bit more time consuming thing. So majorly sit down restaurants will be using it,
Right.
right? Which I have taken. But I saw in fact a lot of QSRs are using it. Right.
Interesting.
In fact, a lot of small, like we also are partnered with Chai Sutta Bar
Right.
across 20 plus outlets of theirs.
Interesting.
Right. Better Cafe has about 40 plus outlets. We are partnered with them.
Right.
So a lot of these restaurants also use it. And another thing that really surprised me was the
Uh-huh.
loyalty system that we did. Right.
Interesting.
So when we launched the loyalty system, we wanted to make sure it was very unique to what most people are providing.
Right.
And at the same time, it helped the restaurants also.
Uh-huh.
Right. So what we did, interestingly, is we burn your points within 30 days.
Okay.
Right. So let's
Interesting.
say if you do not visit that restaurant again in 30 days, right, the points will burn.
Okay.
And that is when we saw suddenly in the last 7 days, a lot of people are now visiting. On an average, what used to happen is previously they used to visit a restaurant to once in 3 months type
Right.
of thing.
Right.
Right. Now that has suddenly changed to once a month. Right.
Interesting.
A lot of times they end up going, they're like, huh, and we give them those reminders. Right. And a lot of restaurants started taking a huge surge. Like we expected some
Interesting.
surge, but the amount of response that we got, right, has been very, very interesting so far.
Interesting. Interesting. I mean, that automatically brings me to a question, right? What's the kind of impact that you've seen, right? And you're absolutely right when you say that, right? That people today want to try newer things, right? And that's the that's become the new normal, right? And that's largely because there's just so much of influence, there's so much of content, right? People want to try new things, new cuisines, and that's put a lot of pressure on restaurants as well, right? The inconsistency of consumer is just kind of it's becoming, like I said, right, the new normal.
Correct.
Earlier, restaurants could, thrive on, and they could have some predictability, right? That, X amount of customers, right? And we send out an offer, there's going to be Y amount of conversion, the math, right? It used to be very, very predictable. Now is not really the case. What's the kind of impact that you've seen, right, in your capacity, across, as soon as, for example, you implemented your tech stack, right? What's the kind of impact that you've seen? I mean, you kind of alluded to it, right, in your earlier point, but I'd love to understand, at a restaurant level, what's been the impact that you've seen? I mean, how, say, for example, on matrices like, say, time to place an order, for example, right? Are the AOBs, for example, increasing, right? What is your sense? What is that you observed across these two or three key matrices, which are very important to, I think, any restaurant?
So on an average, at least what we have seen after implementing our solution, their AOV goes up by almost 30-40%.
Oh,
Right.
interesting.
On an average, it's about 20-25, but I have seen it go as high as 50% also.
Okay.
Right. Another thing that I have seen, and that kind of has shocked me also. This is what people say, like you provide a solution, and then people start using it in more ways than you could imagine.
Absolutely.
Right. So what a lot of our restaurant partners do is now they do some sort of a dynamic pricing.
Okay.
Right. On, let's say, on weekends they change pricing for certain items. On
Right.
weekdays they change it for certain items. Right. And we have seen them experiment a lot with pricing, which they were not able to do previously because
Otherwise.
physical menus kitne baar print karoge types.
Right.
Right. Now they are able to
Interesting.
finally kind of do it. And this is something that I have also seen very recently happening.
Right.
Right. Where a lot of restaurants are constantly experimenting. They are also experimenting a lot with new dishes.
Right.
Previously, what used to happen is they were afraid that, let's say, if I bring a new dish, right,
Right.
and if I don't name it correctly or that is not there, it won't become a hit.
Right.
Right. Now what they do is they add a new dish, they give a very visual appeal to it. Like even names and pricing also they constantly keep changing.
Right.
That we have kind of given them the testing ground which they did not have. Right.
Interesting.
And this is data backed, right? They kind
Right.
of can check the data also back in the day, like what happened 7 days ago, what happened when I did this,
Mhm.
and all of these things, right? And another thing that as a metrics wise that we have seen change is the retention numbers, right?
Interesting.
We knew that restaurant was a very good amount of retention by default,
Right.
right? Because as a customer also, I have all personally been to more or less same restaurants like quite a few times at least. Like
Right.
I even on an
Right.
average once in 3 months is the industry average,
Right.
right? But we saw those numbers increasing a lot in COVID. Also, one thing is by default due to COVID, right? Restaurants are more concentric, and most of their customers now are living nearby,
Mhm.
right? Before COVID, a lot of us used to travel a lot
Right.
and then visited restaurants across the board. But now it has become very concentric, right? You
Interesting.
will probably visit either near your office or near your home,
Right.
right? These are the only two places where you will find
Right.
that.
Interesting. Dharmin, that automatically brings me to a question, and something we've kind of covered this part in a small way, right? But I wanna actually spend a few minutes talking about this, right? Now, when you talk of restaurants, right? I mean, they've been overwhelmed with the kind of technology which has been available, right? And I think there are a variety of players that have come up. There were players that came who helped restaurants, for example, going digital, right? Places like LimeTray, and they got reasonable amount of funding. And then there have been many others, right? POS, for example, has been a very, very active segment, right? There have been many POS companies that have come in. There are a lot of fulfillment companies coming in. We've been seeing food is one area which is seen from a technology standpoint. A lot of people have been trying to sort of crack it, right? Now, what happens in the process is that while, of course, initially a lot of restaurateurs, right, and a lot of business owners within the food space used to be very excited about, the possibility of technology integration, right? Not a lot of these technologies have really played to their expectation, right? It's only complicated things for them. And I'll give you a small case in point, right? Uh, I've had a first-hand experience of backing a company which was into loyalty, and this was some time back, right, a couple of years back, where one of the leading restaurateurs in the country said that your longevity in the market is a function of your capitalization, right? What's the kind of funds that you've raised. As soon as that finishes, right, if you're not able to go out and raise the next round of money, you might cease to exist, which essentially puts my entire business model in jeopardy, right? And this is something which he's pointed out to our face, right? And this is not a happy position, right, or a condition. What I want to come to is, what are the sales cycles like, right? Because, at the end of the day, you've built this technology. Unless it kind of sees that adoption, right, and that enthusiasm, it will never fly. Uh, what I would love to understand is how long are these sales cycles, right? What are some of the challenges that you or your team experiences when it comes to convincing these players to adopt this technology? What's been your sense of it, or has 2020 in a way eased it for you, right? That they forgot of everything that existed in the past and they realize that this is the new normal which we will have to live with, and thus it becomes important to have a Dharmin to empower us, right? To cater to our customers better. What's been that
Uh,
cycle like? Is what I want to
in fact,
understand.
our sales cycles in general, on an average,
Uh-huh.
right, they have been much better than what at least I've heard from other players in the industry.
Right.
Right. In fact, we are partnered with about 500 plus restaurants. Right.
Hmm.
In fact, over 100 restaurants we have put it on wait list. Right.
Oh, interesting.
This is because of the tech bandwidth that
Right.
goes on for
Sure.
building AR in general is a much complicated
Right.
systems to build. We got tech bandwidth. Right.
Uh-huh.
So one very interesting thing that we do but by the way, on an average, it only takes about 6 to 7 days to close a restaurant.
Okay.
Right. Not more than that. I don't
Nice.
think there are any restaurants that took us a month also to close.
Right.
Right. Ideally, what we do very intentionally is we go and capture the high-end restaurant or the most likable restaurant
Okay.
in an area first,
Right.
right? And then what happens in restaurant industry, as you correctly said, they did not live up to their expectations, was because they were bad at what they were doing.
Right.
In all honesty, right? Restaurant industry is very huge on word of mouth.
Hmm.
Right. If something works at the restaurant nearby you, then I will use the same thing as a restaurant here.
Right.
Right. Restaurants are always concentric. there will be one area in each city, each space, which will have 5-10 restaurants together.
Right.
Like there will be areas where there is no restaurant, but there, and then areas where there will be 5-10 restaurants always.
Absolutely.
Restaurants,
Right.
you will always find them together.
Right.
Right. And it is because of that. So what we do is we take the 2 restaurants which are most working, and then we all the other 8 generally call us.
Interesting.
In fact, every single day, almost 3 to 4 restaurants call us or email us that we want to partner with you.
Right.
Like that happens with us all the time, every day. And so on the restaurant end, we have seen that, and it is because it spreads, right? If you provide at the end of the day a good service to one restaurant and they are seeing it working well, right? And also what happens is a lot of customers also go out and speak, right? They kind of experience, let's say, at 2 restaurants, they visit the 3rd or 4th restaurant and they talk with them and they're like, ye nahi hai kya? Like, can I
Right.
not use it?
Interesting.
And things like that. So by default, that whole cycle kicks in.
Super. Super. I mean, what I would love to understand is the business model around it, right? In terms of, for example, how are you charging, right? I mean, today restaurants have become just so much more savvier when it comes to, the costs and the ROI, right? Which earlier was not necessarily the case, right? They were very happy-go-lucky, right? In many ways of what they adopted. Things have changed, right? I think post-COVID things have changed. We've seen many restaurants completely pivot their business model, right? From being a very capex driven model to, getting into a dark kitchen model and so on and so forth, right? The scale has been very different. The audience has been very different. We've seen many people very sharply think through, the menus that they, for example, had, right? So a lot of experimentation for some of these marquee restaurants has actually kind of come down, right? So there's a lot of that shift which has happened in the last 1.5 years, right? What's been your proposition to them to ensure that you've kind of highlighted in terms of the kind of impact that you're able to create, right? But it's also important to understand cost at the beginning, right? Because impact is something that's, I mean, the assessment of impact happens over a period of time, right? But what's the business model right now, and what's say, for example, when you sign up a restaurant, right? What does a restaurant has to commit to you in the process? I'd love to understand that.
So that is, and by the way, this is also one of the reasons why we have great adoption. Like
Sure.
we don't charge them anything upfront. Right.
Interesting.
We are very clear that in the current scene, with restaurants, I have been one of the very heavy hitted industries. Right. So we don't charge them anything upfront. We charge them 5 to 7% commission on every order that takes place on the app.
Right.
Right. What happens with the restaurant as an industry is they have margins. Right. That thing works very well for them. Most restaurants have about 70-80% gross margins.
Sure.
Right. In fact, they pay Zomato 30%, right, on orders that take place.
Right.
And that is why we made it in a way in a system, right, where we don't charge them anything upfront, and we only charge them 5 to 7% commission on every order that takes place on that. Right. In this sense, it helps us align both of them, right? And it also kind of goes on to show that if they use it and if their customers use it, only then they will actually pay.
Interesting.
Right. And it has been the case with most of the restaurants. And then once what happens is, by the time that chunk becomes good enough for them to look at, they realize the impact also. Like they are suddenly seeing, okay, if I'm paying them X amount a month roughly, right, in commissions, but then the impact I'm getting is actually much larger than that. Right. In fact, what happens is when we tell most of our restaurants that we will charge you X% commission, their question is, are you sure you're only going to charge that much? Right. They have seen Swiggy and Zomato come in at about 12%, 15%, and then ramp it up to this point. Right. We'll also probably increase charges to a certain extent going forward. But more or less, what we have seen is in Indian ecosystem, like that model has worked really well. Most players have been already adopting a similar level of model. Right. So that is what we have been doing.
Interesting. I mean, there's an interesting point that you highlight about, Swiggy and Zomato, right? And I'm not going to take it away from them because, they've built a certain position for themselves, right?
Correct.
Right. And they're the ones who've really gone out and acquired the customer, right? And I think for any business, getting the customer is the biggest cost, right? Apart from, of course, HR and other things, which you can kind of scale, as you go along, right? As you build. But getting the customer is the most important. I mean, you come from a marketing background, right? Where you help many of these businesses acquire customers. Now, is that also an area of focus for you, right? Is that also a support that you offer to, these restaurants, or you don't dabble with that at all because that could potentially compromise your relationship with these and adoption, right, with these restaurateurs. So, I mean, do you play
We
that
do
role
offer
or you
that.
don't play
Yeah.
that role?
No, we actually do play that role. Right.
Interesting.
We don't do it intentionally, but by default, over time, by speaking with users and seeing that, right, we saw a lot of users actually using the app before going to a restaurant to check
Uh-huh.
out their menus,
Right.
and because they kind of did not have much option to do it,
Right.
right? Because overall, other players they were just showing a photo of the physical menu,
Sure.
which by default is very ridiculous if you're bringing them online.
Right.
So by default, we started with that. We're adding more and more modules to it. So going forward, you will see a much more social ecosystem around it. Right, we
Interesting.
are adding more social features like friend recommendation, sharing of loyalty points, recommendation engine, and few things around it.
Interesting.
Right. So, but that's not something that we charge currently for at
Uh-huh.
all. Right, that is a byproduct of the existing product that is happening, and we leave it currently as it is.
Super. Narvin, when you deal with restaurants, and this is another very very important point, right? And this is more a point on the business model that you put out, right? Now, I've had an opportunity of knowing many senior founders, right? Who've been in this space of dealing with restaurants, right, and who've actually chosen to work on commission models, right? Now, the biggest of all problems is recovery of payouts, right? Because as soon as it reaches a level of, say, 50K, 60K, 70K, right? Beyond that, it just becomes difficult to recover a lot of that money from restaurants, right? In fact, a lot of players have flipped their models to being a prepaid model, right? Where a lot of these restaurants now pay upfront to buy those points, right? What's been your observation? Are you in a prepaid zone right now? Have you gotten to that point where you can introduce a model like that, or have you introduced such systems, or are you still in a model where it's like a postpaid billing, which you offer, right, depending on what are the number of orders and so on and so forth, right? What's been your
Ideally, what we
observation?
have seen right now, we are not in a prepaid model,
Uh-huh.
right? It's we are in the post, and we have
Sure.
not seen that happening. What happens is that might happen with a few players, right? Only and only, let's say, when they are not able to deliver on their promise, right?
Okay.
For example, let's say for the likes of Magic Pin or few others, right,
Sure.
where they ask you for certain charges of some sort,
Hmm.
right? That generally happens because they are not able to, let's say, deliver on the promise that they are given,
Right.
right? That is the only reason. Ideally, in good faith also, a lot, because what happens is, as a restaurant, they know this is not a one time thing for them,
Hmm.
right? At the end of the day, they need to partner. There are limited players at the end of the day,
Right.
right, that are helping them, especially in the dining industry. There are hardly, let's say, 2 3 players at max,
Hmm.
right? And that too majorly on table reservation side, and not really dine-in space. So ideally, in the dine-in space, that is what happens when a lot of restaurants are now more than willing to pay.
Hmm.
Right. In fact, if you look at, in all honesty, Swiggy or Zomato for that matter,
Right.
right, they do pay them. They have been with them for, I think, over 3 4 5 years at this point,
Interesting.
right? So it will only happen, let's say, if you promise restaurants something and you don't deliver. And in all honesty, as a company, you should not charge if you are promising something and you're not able to deliver on it.
Right. Interesting.
It
I
kind
mean,
of doesn't make sense.
interesting. Two important points, right? A lot of players have actually kind of are kind of and these are some recent changes that we've kind of seen, right? A lot of these players have actually created pass-through payment structures, right? And I think the good part is with UPI now coming in, a lot of this is now possible, right? What are the next couple of years on the product front like, right? I'd love to understand that. Are you creating some similar stuff? That's question number one. Number two, what I want to understand is, do you anticipate your role in owning a restaurant where they use you for 100% of their client base, and you being in a unique position there? Or do you think with a couple of other players, it will continue to coexist, right? You will have a limited role to play, others will have a limited role to play. Overall, there's going to be an improvement in the overall run rate of a restaurant, or a food business, right? What do you visualize, all of, like I said, your product plans and your ownership plans next couple of years?
So, so as a product, how we look at, and this is what we have been looking at since the past few years
Sure.
on how dining in or overall as a food industry is progressing. right? So we will be adding, as I said, right, more social structures to it,
Mhm.
right? You will now see it being a much more social and engaging type of a play, right?
Interesting.
We'll also add more some sort of more rewards and sharing of rewards, right?
Interesting.
In the whole play. Also, we are also trying to constantly gamify the whole experience.
Right.
Right? How we look at it is the dining experience is really broken today. Right?
Uh-huh.
We have solved it to a certain extent, and we'll keep solving it even further.
Right.
Right? We want to make sure that your whole, from start to end, the whole dining experience that you are having, right, is completely amazing.
Right.
Right? It should be so good across restaurants that you kind of fall in love with that.
Right.
Right? How we look at overall as a market is there are two things I look at. One is on an average, is the market growing or reducing?
Mhm.
Right? Because that at the end of the day matters a lot.
Right.
And what we have seen is across overall as a market, right? They have been and going in the next decade also overall, right? It is going to grow 4 times than
Uh-huh.
it is currently. And what
Interesting.
happens if you look at, let's say, US or Singapore or developed nations, almost 60% or 50% of the meals are outside,
Right.
right? Whereas in India, only 10% or even less than that are outside. We
Right.
generally eat out, let's say, twice or thrice a month. And if you actually think about it, 10 or 15 years ago, it was more or less something like once or twice a month.
Right.
Now it is almost 4 times a month. Every
Right.
weekend, you kind of go out, right?
Mhm.
And we see that almost tripling where at least a decent part of your food actually comes from out consistently,
Mhm.
right? Food delivery is doing it to a certain extent already at this point. Right? If you think about just outside food consumption in general, on an average, right, that is going higher, right? And there are a lot of reasons why it happens, right, across like education, women empowerment, how women have played the role across,
Right.
right? If you look at it, and it is going to happen. We have seen that happening in developed nations, right? When more and more women by default end up in the workforce, your dependence on outside food will increase.
Interesting.
And we have seen that consistently in developed nations over decades. So secondly, we look at overall in the market segment,
Mhm.
is there will be a decent percentage of, ideally we would want obviously 100% of the market to be ours,
Right.
right? But of course, you will know that is not something very feasible. On average, how we look at is almost 50% to 60% of the orders that will be flowing in for a restaurant will
Mhm.
be processed by us, and the remaining either can be of some other player or majorly it will be of the existing customers out there, right? Wherein let's say if they still, and they are a very frequent purchase or they want to eat one specific thing that they have in mind, right? When they just basically don't see at the menu altogether, don't,
Right.
they just go in and just say, get me
Interesting.
this.
Interesting. I mean, I wanna spend just about a couple of minutes on competition, right? Now, competition for you is brewing up across, of course, you have very clear competitors, right, that are out there. But then there are a lot of other players that are coming up, right? Now there are players like, some marquee brands in the loyalty space. There are certain, you know, uh, companies that are built on intelligence stack, right, which are helping banking and financial institutions to offer better discounts to their customers, right? Depending on their location, their consumption patterns. They're aligning a lot of that data, and there are a bunch of them which are coming in, right? So competition for you is not just, for example, coming in from the visible players, right? It's actually coming in from, quarters that you possibly have not factored in, right? Now we know for a fact that anybody who has that ability to go out and better discounts, right? I mean, of course, I understand, what you're offering is, there's a differentiation in what you're offering, right? You're offering visualization, which essentially helps in better AOVs. But at the end of the day, from a consumer standpoint, it's also about who's helping them, uh, uh, get a better discount, right? Or get a better pricing, right? Uh, what did you make out of all of this, right? Are you keeping a track of some of these other players that are coming up in the process? Or in fact, how are you keeping a track of some of the other players that are coming in, right? Because it's very, very important for your longevity, right? For your investors, for your stakeholders who put in their capital, and for all the other stakeholders who align with you, including yourselves, right? The founding team. Uh, what is it that you're doing to address some of those? issues that are not, there are some that are visible, and there are some that are not necessarily visible. I know there are no clear answers to that, right? At best, what you can do is keep a track of them and, pick up those features and very quickly build them. But I would love to understand how are you dealing with all of that?
So ideally, actually, this is in more reverse on how we see it,
Uh-huh.
right? How we have seen essentially is really there is actually no competition for us,
Mhm.
right? If you look at actually the dining space, right, there is only table reservation that is seeing some or other format,
Right.
right? There are companies that are doing QR based ordering, but at least on the numbers that we have seen, it is clearly not working.
Uh-huh.
Right? Restaurants take it, but then after 3 months you go there, they are back to their paper menus.
Sure.
Right? That is not something. I remember even Starbucks at one point asked you compulsory to do it by scanning. Now
Right.
they're just taking it the way they are taking it.
Right.
Right? And that's the problem because there was really never a delta shift from the consumer end. A
Mhm.
lot of it was from the user end, from the restaurant end, but we are bringing that delta shift from the consumer end by telling them not to read an order, but to
Mhm.
watch an order.
Right.
Right. And that is something that has created the largest impact for us.
Interesting.
Right. That is what we call also as a magic moment. Like the moment customers see, let's say, few AR models, right? That is when they are kind of hooked in.
Right.
So if we look at competition today, right, on a direct standpoint, right, there is really no one because if there are, let's say, a normal QR based ordering solution,
Right.
right, but then again, that is just that lacks a lot of different things. They do not have consumer as we have on the app, right? Because by default, if they are on the app, we kind of engage them much more often,
Interesting.
right? We kind of do much more engaging things with them
Right.
compared to a normal QR based system would probably be doing, right? And then there is no other player who has, let's say, a dining in type of solution, right? You
Interesting.
can say dine out and easy diner and few of them, but in honesty they have been here over a decade at this point, right?
Right.
And they're not widely used compared to other players, right?
Interesting.
So we don't
Uh,
see that happening anytime soon.
Interesting.
On other players, let's say, as you said, right, for intelligence platforms or discounting platforms or any of those platforms,
Right.
right, we haven't, on an average, we do keep general track of it, right?
Mhm.
In all honesty, I would have probably spoken with most of their founders or someone from their team, right? We have good connections with most of them,
Right.
right? If we and one thing that we have seen is this will never be a one take solution for a market, right? Because
Uh-huh.
the market is itself is gigantic.
Sure.
In fact, I'll give a very interesting statistic.
Would love to.
Even today in India, almost 70% of home delivery, right, takes place apart from Swiggy and Zomato,
Wow.
right? And that is actually because if you think of it, uh, what happens is just generally calling, and this is also I saw, I did not know this once I was in the space for long enough, I realized this,
Right.
right? Almost 10, if they get, let's say, 3 or 4 orders from delivery players, right, together in a day, they get about 10 orders from their circle, or basically someone
Right.
calls in and they go and deliver,
Interesting.
right? And that happens even today, right? It is something very interesting for us also to see that. I mean,
Right.
that's a decent amount of chunk. We used to think that Zomato and Swiggy almost has completed the market and
Right.
they are on a saturation at a point. But then once
Right.
I came in the market was long enough with more restaurants, that is when I realized. I thought at first that it might be with few restaurants, lucky of type of things.
Right.
But then with more and more consistently, when I saw it, I was like, whoa, even I did not know that this is there. And
So
even with dining, right, across space happens.
I think one thing I can corroborate, right, in what you're saying is that there are a few restaurants that I order from, or my family orders from regularly, right? Uh, and they've continued. So every single time I call them, right, they by default, so for example, when what they pay to any of these delivery players, right, they factor in as commissions, they factor in that as a discount in my order, right, to improve retention, improve relationship, right, and for me to go out and recommend it to, say, other people in my circle. And that's an absolutely phenomenal trend, right? And a lot of these are actually paid, right, for giving out such commissions. So I understand a lot of what you're saying. A lot of them have actually accepted this, across many other conversations, right? So I completely understand where you're coming from. And I kind of agree with you on certain points. Of course, I would, the market is, we still have, we're very infancy, right, when it comes to digital option, right? I think India as a market is kind of is growing
Correct.
across its length and breadth in terms of consumption. I think certain trends will become clear over a period of time, and I think it's a wait and watch. There are no clear answers right now. Uh, Dharmin, we're towards the end of the conversation, right? And I think in line with that, with the paucity of time, what are the next couple of years like, right? What are the next cities that you are kind of, looking at? I'd love to understand that from you. What's in the
So
cards?
So actually, by default, as I said, the product roadmap goes on. So
Right.
simultaneously, we are about 40 people team now. Right, we are
Uh-huh.
raising currently, and we'll be about 200 people team in 6 to 8 months. Right,
Interesting.
we are already launching in Pune and Bangalore.
Right.
Right, these are the two new cities we have started hiring for. Right, in the next 1 year, we already see ourselves in about 12 cities. Right, and then on a longer term frame, we look at it not just as an India problem, but as a world problem. Like as a
Right.
child, also, like here's the thing, like what used to happen with me is I was born and brought up in a digital age.
Right.
Like from the moment I was 10 or 11, I had a phone in my hand. Like and across we have been using apps or majorly consumer apps from foreign countries.
Right.
Right. Even Zoom that we are using, not us. Right. And there is really, if you think about it, there is no consumer app or consumer company from India to the
Uh-huh.
world.
Right.
Right. Hardly on a handful if you can count.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Oyo is doing really good at it currently, but very few people do it because they have copycat models, right? If you think
Right.
of food delivery, it started about 2011 across places.
Right.
15, 16, it came in India, right? Cab booking 2009 US and other countries, 2011,
Interesting.
12, 13 our country. Right. We look at it in a reverse way now. This is time where we build a consumer app that is from India to the world.
Right.
Right. And this is a world problem by
Right.
default. And we want to capture it in that sense only. And we want to grow from not just in over the next 3 to 4 years. Right. We see ourselves in at least 200 cities across at least few nations and grow it from that.
That's amazing. That's an amazing aspiration, Dharmin. We wish you all the very best. My last question, and I think any of my conversations, essentially, where I want founders to, have basically a giveaway for many people who are going to be watching this, right? And I think nothing inspires a founder more than another founder, right? Dharmin, you've entered a category, right? And you actually went on to raise a round of capital. And not that I think a business should be judged on its ability to raise capital, but I think raising capital becomes important, in a market which is now kind of as competitive, right? Now, when somebody goes on and raises investment, right, when a founder goes on and raises investment, they're essentially, what you continue to harp on is the the innovation that you're, for example, doing, right, or certain say shift that you're bringing in, the mode that you create in the process, right? You've been in a business where you are possibly up against all odds, right? There have been clear leaders, and that's not something which is gotten established now. That's something which has been there for a couple of years, right? I think everybody, there are many other players who try to sort of crack, something or the other in the food space, right? But the
Correct.
common argument that they got from anybody who could potentially have invested in that company was that, listen, the players are already established, right? One small move and you'll be out of business, right? And we don't want to risk our capital in an environment like that, right? Tell me what worked for you, right? I think which you want to give away to many of these people who are going to be watching it, right? You will be up against odds. You will be in a competitive environment. You will have the Goliaths, right, out there. But the will to compete is so much more important, right? What are some of those things that work for you that you would want to communicate with many of these founders?
Sure. So ideally, if when even when we were starting, that we were also like, there already it's a very crowded place. Are you sure we want to go there? Right.
Right,
But then when we started digging in deeper, there were two things I realized, and that has hold true till now. Right.
right,
So first, I'll just go and watch Peter Thiel's Competition is for Losers. Right.
right.
Best place for to get that inspiration.
Uh-huh.
Second thing that is there across is uh, I would probably say uh, try and figure out. Let's say if there are even today there are only two unicorns
Right.
majorly, right? Why is it that other people who have been in the space for so long,
Uh-huh.
why have they not worked? Right.
Right.
That is where your most important lesson will be from. rather than from people that have worked, right? And if they have, let's say, on an average, 5 years is the time. If they have not been able to establish a huge dominance in 5 years, right, they'll never be able to do it. Right? Do not fear them as competitions. They are already dinosaurs in this space. Right? They have not figured out in 5 years. Very unlikely they'll be able to figure out in the next 5.
Right.
Right. So do not kind of fear for them. Right. Only fear you should have is probably the largest players. The smaller players, right, already probably by the end of this round we'll be on an average of what Dine Out is doing. Right. We are already in the dine-in space, and obviously make sure you have your own niche. Right. Be very clear. More than that, more than looking out in the market or any of those things, like that is something that you do very later on. First of, just go speak with customers, right? Really understand them. Right. Really understand very clearly what drives them, what doesn't drive them. Right. In fact, I and Baz, we became waiters at a lot of restaurants, right? Just to understand them. Right. Do anything and everything that gets you to speak with them. Right. Because at the end of the day, more than the capital that you raise, it is the customer's capital that will help you move forward for a long run. Right. So always make sure that that is something that you focus on from day one. Right. Are you really able to provide them that value? Right. And then rest other things will work out. Super. Right. Because if industry is growing, you will grow by default. Rest other things will work out. Just make sure you focus on your product and your customers. Right. Other things will work out by default.
Interesting. Dharmin, on that note, thank you so much for taking the time out. And I kind of completely, I think many of the points that you've highlighted in this conversation, right? I kind of agree with those points. Because when you are on the when we are on the other side of the table, right? When you're looking at a business from an investment standpoint, right? We tend to overlook some very important smaller nuances, right? And these nuances actually go on to become larger trends, right? And I think that's a big mistake that a lot of people commit in the process. And I think what you also kind of highlighting in towards in the point that you made, right, that it's about a lot of those smaller nuances, right? Great business models can be built. I think your ability to observe and absorb is just so much more important, because that'll possibly give you a sense of the newer trends which are going to emerge. Your competitor is always going to be so large to kind of deal with very different kind of problems. They will tend to miss this out, which is possibly a crevice that you're looking at, and that will possibly serve as a big opportunity, right, to create another great business, right? Unicorns are imaginary, right? For a market like India, which is kind of growing, I think it's always for a founder more satisfying to solve for the growing audience, right? I think everything else is an incidental. Dharmin, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining. I loved every bit of this conversation. Thank you for taking the time out.
Thank you so much for having me. Right, it was great speaking with you as well.
Thank you.